In the days leading up to the deadly typhoon that struck Hong Kong in the early morning hours of Tuesday, September 18th of the year 1906, there was no real sign of the devastation that was about to unfold. Life in the city was moving along like usual. Hong Kong at the time was a growing British colony and a busy international port. Streets were filled with people going about their day, shopkeepers opening stores, boats crowding the harbor, trams running through the heart of the city, and locals navigating their daily routines. There had been storms before, of course. Typhoons weren't new to the region, but this one would end up being one of the deadliest natural disasters in the city's history. The warning signs were subtle at first. The barometer began to drop steadily on the morning of the storm. Between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock that morning, the pressure fell from 29.74 to 29.28 inches of mercury. This might not mean much to the average person, but to those watching the skies, like the Hong Kong Observatory, it was clear that something serious was developing. Still, there wasn't much time. At 8:40 in the morning, a black drum was raised by the observatory, which was the official warning signal at the time for tropical cyclones. But this was barely 30 minutes before the full force of the typhoon hit. Unfortunately, this short notice left almost no time for preparations. By 9 o'clock, ferries had stopped operating, but it was already too late for many. Foreign steamer captains and their crews, stranded on land, had no time to reach their vessels and secure them. Some people didn't even realize the danger until it was upon them. That's how fast it moved. Despite some warnings being telegraphed days earlier from Japan and Shanghai, it wasn't until the morning of the 18th that most people in Hong Kong knew anything was wrong. It caught nearly everyone off guard. The typhoon itself had formed several days earlier, around Saturday, September 15th, near the Baoshi Channel to the southeast of Hong Kong. It was first spotted by Japanese meteorologists east of Formosa, which is modern-day Taiwan. Ships passing through the Pacific Ocean also recorded changes in wind and pressure. But back in Hong Kong, where communication systems were limited and weather tracking was still a developing science, the urgency of those early warnings didn't make their way to the people in time. By the time the typhoon approached Hong Kong, it had grown into a powerful storm with winds swirling around a massive core. The eye of the storm was recorded just 30 nautical miles away, with wind speeds reaching 24 miles per hour as it neared the city. While that might not sound extremely fast, what made this storm deadly was its sheer size and intensity. The wind force extended across an area about 100 miles in diameter. The winds were violent, but the real damage came from what followed: the rising water, the massive waves, and the terrifying storm surge. As people in the city began to realize that this was no ordinary storm, panic set in. Boats were rushed to shelter if they could make it, markets shut down. People ran for cover, trying to find solid ground or shelter indoors. The skies grew darker and the air grew heavier. For many, it was already too late to escape what was coming, and still no one could have predicted how bad things would get. The typhoon was just beginning its path of destruction, and within hours, it would change the city forever. As the sun rose over Hong Kong on the morning of Tuesday, September 18th, the air was thick and unusually still. Most residents were completely unaware that a massive storm was racing toward the city. At around 8:40 in the morning, the Royal Observatory hoisted the black drum signal, a warning system used since the year 1884 to alert of approaching tropical cyclones. Just minutes later, the typhoon gun was fired at the harbor, sounding the alarm that danger was imminent. But by that point, it was already too late for many. The typhoon had moved in fast. In just 2 hours, barometer readings dropped rapidly, from 29.74 to 29.28 inches of mercury. That kind of drop signaled a sudden and extreme pressure change, a sure sign of the approaching storm's intensity. By 9 in the morning, ferry services had already come to a halt, and people were stranded all across the harbor. Many foreign steamer crews couldn't reach their vessels in time to prepare, leaving countless ships vulnerable as the storm swept in. The winds picked up with terrifying speed. The Hong Kong Observatory measured a velocity of 24 miles per hour when the eye of the storm was still 30 nautical miles away. That might not sound fast at first, but with a storm of this scale, those winds carried an unstoppable force. In a matter of minutes, the sea became a boiling mess of churning waves and crashing surf. Tidal waves slammed against the shoreline, flooding entire coastal areas before anyone had time to react. Along the waterfront, the rising water broke down sea walls, carried away small boats, and smashed wooden piers to splinters. The typhoon's full power became tragically clear as it hit during high tide. Thousands of people living in vulnerable coastal areas were directly in its path, For many Chinese families living on houseboats, some of the nearly 5,000 registered watercraft in the city, there was no escape. The storm struck so quickly that few could make it to shore. Along the stretch from West Point to Causeway Bay, sampans and lighters were tossed into one another like toys. Entire communities living on the water disappeared in an instant. By mid-morning, buildings on land were also being torn apart. Roof tiles and glass rained down into the streets. Electric tram lines on Hong Kong Island came to a stop when wiring systems were ripped apart. The Peak tram was also forced to shut down after damage to its signal cables and nearby tracks. On Bowen Road, fallen trees and debris made entire routes impassable. At the Botanical Gardens, many trees were destroyed, although the zoological section somehow made it through untouched. The storm showed no mercy. At West Point, major warehouses, including those owned by Jardine, Matheson, and Jebson and Company, lost their roofs and had their walls ripped away. Piers collapsed across the Central District, including the Star Ferry Wharf, Blake Pier, and Queen's Statue Wharf. Even newly constructed landmarks like the General Post Office and the Supreme Court site were heavily damaged, their bamboo scaffolding torn down and scattered across nearby roads. This typhoon didn't just damage a few structures. It overwhelmed every part of life in Hong Kong, from transportation and housing to public safety and communication. And all of it happened in just a few short hours, leaving the city in shock and on its knees. But as devastating as this was, the true scale of the disaster would only become clear as people began searching for loved ones in the wreckage. Next, we'll look at the tragedy that unfolded in the harbor, with ships sunk, hundreds of lives lost, and heroic rescues carried out in the middle of the storm. As the typhoon continued its assault on Hong Kong, the waters of Victoria Harbor turned into a deadly trap. The chaos reached its peak between 10 in the morning and noon, when winds blew with hurricane force and the sea surged over the seawalls. The harbor, normally a place of trade and activity, became unrecognizable. Massive waves rose up without warning, some said to be over 30 feet high, crashing down on vessels of all sizes. More than 200 ships and boats were damaged or sunk. Among them were ferries, cargo steamers, and fishing junks. The Chung Shan, a large steamer, was thrown from its mooring and slammed into the dockside before capsizing. The Yunnan, another vessel anchored near Kowloon, broke free and collided with smaller boats before vanishing beneath the waves. The Japanese freighter Asama Maru, caught in the path of the storm while attempting to leave port, lost control and drifted until it struck a pier. Its hull was badly damaged, but it managed to remain afloat. Countless smaller boats were not so fortunate. Entire fleets of sampans, which served as both homes and workplaces for many families, were shattered by debris or dashed against sea walls. Witnesses later described seeing people clinging to pieces of wreckage or trying to swim through oil-coated water, screaming for help as strong currents pulled them under. The sounds of splintering wood and cries for rescue echoed through the harbor. Rescue efforts began while the storm still raged. British Navy personnel from the HMS Tamar risked their lives by launching lifeboats into the rough water, pulling dozens of people to safety. Police and fire crews also worked to save those trapped on the docks and in partially sunken ships. Some managed to haul survivors up by ropes and ladders, even as the wind threatened to blow them into the sea themselves. Others could only watch helplessly as overturned boats floated past with no signs of life on board. One of the most heartbreaking scenes unfolded near Aberdeen, on the southern side of Hong Kong Island. A fleet of fishing boats had tried to take shelter in the narrow inlet there, but the wind shifted suddenly and a massive wave surged into the harbor mouth. Within minutes, more than 40 boats were overturned or crushed together. Entire families were lost, including children and elderly relatives who had been asleep below deck when the storm hit. As the winds finally began to weaken around midday, the damage was already staggering. Oil from damaged freighters spread across the water, mixing with floating debris, splintered wood, and unclaimed belongings. The sea, once the heart of Hong Kong's lifeline, had become a floating graveyard. The worst was not yet over, though. Survivors began emerging from shelters, only to find their homes destroyed and loved ones missing. With communication lines down and roads blocked, news of the disaster spread slowly. It would take several more days before the full human cost became known. As we wrap up, we'll explore the impact on land, how entire neighborhoods were flattened, how hospitals struggled to keep up with the wounded, and how the government began the long and painful process of recovering from one of the worst typhoons in Hong Kong's history. In the aftermath of the typhoon, The people of Hong Kong faced a long road to recovery. In the weeks that followed, efforts to clear debris and restore order were carried out mostly by hand, using basic tools. Communication lines had been knocked out, and it took days before messages could be sent to nearby cities for assistance. Supplies were slow to arrive. What little help did come had to be delivered by sea, as many roads were blocked or destroyed. The colonial government conducted an inquiry to understand how the storm had caused so much damage and loss of life. Reports from that time revealed not only the limits of existing infrastructure, but also how ill-prepared the region was for a storm of that strength. The storm pushed the city to think more seriously about long-term planning. In the years that followed, improvements were made to breakwaters and harbor facilities. More attention was given to weather observation, and the typhoon warning system was gradually expanded. But for the people who lived through it, the typhoon left a permanent scar. Many survivors lost their homes, their families, or their livelihoods. For fishermen and harbor workers in particular, the disaster was devastating. Some left the region entirely, while others stayed and rebuilt, one wall at a time. The 1906 Hong Kong typhoon is still remembered today as one of the deadliest natural disasters in the city's history. It highlighted the need for better preparedness, better infrastructure, and better understanding of nature's power. While the city has grown into a modern metropolis over the past century, the memory of that storm remains a reminder that even the most advanced societies are never fully in control when it comes to the force of nature.